hit record. But yeah, next Monday we're not going to have an official meeting. You know, you guys will be kind of knee deep into the writing of the paper next week. So what you will be doing though is we're going to, instead of a class meeting, we're going to be conducting a citation workshop on Blackboard. So what that means is I'm going to post, you know, this. I'll post directions for you, but I'm going to post a bunch of random scrambled information for a bunch of these different entries. So, for instance, you'll have a book chapter, a book, a journal article from a database, just like how I showed you that you could find last week. How to cite a website, how to cite, you know, an article in a book. So I'm going to teach you how to do all that stuff. But it doesn't do me any good to lecture to you. Here's where the period goes. Here's where the quotation mark goes. You know, it's much more productive for you guys to kind of fool around and do it yourself. You know, you're going to basically look up on a website how to cite each one of these. And then you're going to take the scrambled information and put it in the right order. So next week, as you work on your research, you will be doing that for both MLA and APA style. So you'll get a homework grade for 2 different days next week. First time you do the citation activity, you're going to do it in MLA style. The second time you do it, you're going to do it in APA style. The reason why I will have you do both is, besides English class, hardly anyone else uses MLA. Most other classes use APA. So I don't want you to walk out of my class not knowing how to do both. Okay. So that is next week. Like I said, the reason why I'm not having a lecture is there's no point. You know, it's much better for you guys to work on this yourself and trial and error. At the end of the week, I will post a key for you. But once that key's posted, you can't make up that grade. It's pretty much you get a 10 out of 10 just by doing it kind of grade. Okay. So after next Friday, once I post that key, that activity is up. Right? You can't make it up because that key's already there. So next Tuesday, next Monday, next Friday, do the MLA and APA. Make sure you have it done by Friday of next week so that I can post the key for you. Just as another reminder, I was looking at the topic proposals on Blackboard. You know, combine this class combined with my other class, there's at least 20 students in both. And there's only 9 topic proposals up right now. So if you haven't submitted your topic proposal yet, I need that ASAP. Okay, because I need to know what your topic is so that I can approve it, make sure that it sounds good, and make sure that you're on the right track. And this early in the process is a good time for me to intervene, you know, to make sure that you're doing a topic that'll work. Okay. So I can kind of help steer you in the right direction. So if you haven't submitted that topic yet, you were supposed to do that last week. But if you haven't submitted that topic yet, do so today or tomorrow. Okay? Because if you don't, you're going to get a 0 on that proposal. It's important that you submit that so that I know that you're on the right track. And this is going to be your topic for this paper and the next paper. These 2 papers kind of build off of each other. Okay. So you need to make sure that it's something good, something that you're interested in. something that you want to learn more about, perhaps. Okay. Questions, comments, concerns about any of the class business before I proceed to talking about the paper?
I have a question really quick.
Okay.
So as far as approving our topics and whatnot, are you just going to reply to the discussion board, or will there be an email?
Yeah, I will reply to the discussion board. I will actually grade the discussion board post. You'll get like a 20 out of 20 or whatever. I'll say, yeah, this sounds good. Or, hey, I'll write your feedback. Hey, maybe you need to rethink this a little bit. Right?
Okay.
So that's how it'll work. Yeah, so if I say, maybe you need to rethink this a little bit, maybe that's a time that you can start an email conversation with me. Be like, okay, here's what I'm thinking now. Okay. So if I do tell you to rethink it, or maybe your topic's too broad or something like that, that's when you can communicate with me, and you can then make sure you're on the right track. You can talk to me by email, or call me, or whatever you want to do. Okay. So after class today, I'm going to grade those of you who've already submitted. I'm going to check again tomorrow. Okay, so if you haven't done that yet, do so. Just reading the list, I got Trinity, Destiny, Savannah, Christy, Hunter, Cheyenne, and Richard. Okay, so if I didn't read your name off, get that in today. The syllabus is going to change a little bit. We've done well sticking to schedule so far this term, but I'm actually going to give another week or so for this third paper than I thought I was going to. Okay, because I wanted you to, especially this paper, I want you to take your time. I want to make sure you're doing it right and all this good stuff. So let's pull the prompt up. And I will walk you through this. For 1 second. This prompt is up on Blackboard in the paper 3 learning module. Okay, I just put it up. So if you want to follow along with me on your own screen, feel free. But I just uploaded it just a few minutes ago. So my screen should now read paper 3, the exploratory essay. So the exploratory essay is a paper unlike anything you've probably ever done before. So what you're going to be doing is you're taking this topic, and it's ideally a topic that you want to learn more about, something that ideally it's something that you're not so hard-headed about that you're not going to change your initial belief, right? If you don't have to change your initial belief, but this should be something that you organically kind of let happen. So even if your initial belief doesn't change, you still need to be open-minded to the other side. Okay, so whatever topic it is you pick, you need to make sure of that. This paper is called the exploratory essay. I also call it a dialectical essay. A dialectical essay. I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. So So you're going to be looking up articles from the databases that I showed you last week. Okay, I'm actually going to have you look up, I think, 8 articles. This is going to be an assignment that you do before the paper. So let me actually take a step back and talk about what I want you to do before the paper. Let's see. So this thing I'm getting ready to show you, this is due before a week before the paper. Okay. But this is kind of a mini paper that you're going to do. I'm going to count it as several homework grades. But you will actually include this with your paper. Okay. So you're going to have a really long works cited in a nutshell. But this is what's called, so 2 weeks from now, I'm asking you to do this, okay? This is called a bibliography. And what you do in a bibliography, it's kind of important that you do the bibliography before the actual paper. But what you do in a bibliography is you look up these sources. So whatever topic it is you pick, you need to make sure that, like I said, it's something that sometimes topics are so new and you're not going to find stuff in these databases. But you ideally want to pick something where you're going to find stuff in these databases. What you do in a bibliography is you cite your source and correctly according to MLA style. As you notice, it goes in alphabetical order, descending alphabetical order, okay? But you cite your source, and that's what you're going to be practicing to do next week. So instead of having a class session next week, you're going to be practicing how to cite sources. But you're going to cite your source correctly. So whether it comes from a website or whether it comes from a journal article, maybe it comes from an ebook. Whatever the case is, you're going to cite your thing correctly. And then basically underneath it, you just sum up what the article's about. So you guys know how to do summary at this point. After the August Tannen paper, I taught you how to summarize an article. So you're going to summarize what the article was about. So what was the main point of the article, right? What building blocks in the argument did the writer use to support that point, right? So sum up in its entirety what the article said, okay? And maybe a sentence or two. This will actually help you write the third paper, but a sentence or two at the end explaining, did this article change, how did this article influence your thinking on this topic? Did it change your view? Did it add to your original view? Whatever the case is, a sentence or two at the very end of each of these entries is going to help you out. So you cite your source, you summarize it, just a sentence or two to close it out about what the source does to your thinking. So I'm going to ask, I'm showing you this example from somebody did from another class. As you see, it's pretty straightforward. It just goes down in descending order. So I'm having you do this a week before the paper's due to make sure that you do your research ahead of time. right? Because if I don't make sure that you do your research ahead of time, you procrastinators out there will try to do the research the day the papers do, right? And you'll throw in a random quote, not even read the article, throw in a random quote, act like you've read it. Right? I know the tricks. So I want to make sure you do this thing right. Take it in baby steps. Right? This is going to be the first major step before the paper. Summarize you cite your source, you summarize it. And I will give you a grade on this as an informal writing grade, but then you will actually include this in your final paper. So this will be your works cited page. Normally a works cited page is just your citations, but I'm going to make sure, but for this paper, I'll have you include the summaries of the articles too. Okay. So once you get your approval on your topic, start doing some research. And I'm asking that you come up with 8 entries here. 8. Okay, that's not too many. You know, I could ask for a lot more than that. So you ideally want to find stuff on both sides of your issue, right? You want to try to come up with as much of equal balance as you can. You know, you don't want to have 7 articles for cloning and 1 article against, right? That's not balance. Balance it as much as you can. I'm not saying that I will say this, 5 of the articles, so the majority of the articles, then 5 of them should probably be professional, come from the professional databases. Okay, I will leave you room for 3 articles or 3 websites or whatever the case is that you can just Google. Okay, sometimes Googling stuff helps you parse out a topic better than actually these articles. You know, but I am saying that a majority of these need to come from the database. You know, just because that's peer-reviewed information, it's credible, and all that good stuff. So 5 of the 8 need to come from the database. You know, to try to balance the perspectives as much as you can. Don't make sure this list isn't too biased. So this is going to be step 1. Okay, like I said, step 1 is due 2 weeks from now. So you got plenty of time to do some research. Like if you find an article and you think it works, you can just kind of work on this piecemeal, right? Find a couple of articles at a time, read through them, cite them, and summarize them. Right? You can work on this thing in chunks. Make sure you're not overwhelming yourself too much at once. So if you happen to miss last week's class where I showed you how to use the databases, or if you need a reminder, watch last week's class on our Blackboard. I do have last week's class uploaded to our Blackboard. I have another video too where I walk you through it. That's not a live class. So no reason why you guys shouldn't know how to use the databases, because that's what we did last week. So that's step 1. Okay. And I just showed you a bibliography, right? As you see, it's not a paper. All you do is cite, summarize, cite, summarize. You do 8 of those entries. Okay. So before I move on to talking about the paper, then this is the first step of the paper. But before I move on to talking about the paper, questions about that? Anything not make anything I say not make sense.
So, with the paper itself, I know we're supposed to keep it balanced, but are we eventually going to lean one way or the other, or is it really just going to be like a unbiased view of both sides?
You are going to hold that thought because I will be answering that question in a second. Okay?
Alrighty.
Yeah, but you shall see here in just a sec. No, but just pertaining to the bibliography, then questions about that. That's what I'm asking for makes sense. Give me thumbs up reactions on Zoom. Okay. All right. Some of you didn't put them up. So, like I said, speak now or hold your peace. I will. Or go ahead.
Something crazy happened to my computer while you was explaining what we was doing with it, and I lost audio for like a minute of you explaining.
Okay. I can explain it again. I don't have any problem doing that.
Just if it doesn't inconvenience anyone.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure one more explanation won't hurt everyone.
Thank you, sir.
So again, step one, do 2 weeks from now. You cite your source. You do 8 of these entries. You cite your source in MLA style, which that's what you're going to be practicing next week. And then you summarize your source. And at the very end of these, after you do summarize in a sentence or two, explain what the article was about. Or not that, explain how the article influenced your opinion on the topic. So did it reaffirm your initial belief? Did it change your belief in any way? So you cite it, you summarize, you briefly analyze at the end of each of these entries. And you do 8 entries, and 5 of the entries need to come from the databases. Okay, I'm leaving you room for 3 entries that don't come from the databases. Sometimes stuff that doesn't come from the databases can help you even more. So, and of the 8, try to keep as much balance as you can on all the sides of the topic. So let's say you're doing a paper on cloning. Make sure that ideally you would have 4 articles for cloning and 4 against. Right? But let's say you have 5 articles for and 3 against. That's still kind of balanced. But once you get to the 6 and 2 or something like that, that's where the list starts to become unbalanced. So try to come up with as much balance as you can on perspectives on your issue. So that's less long-winded of an explanation than I did before your audio cut out. But hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Like I said, guys, the main thing is don't treat this like it's a paper. Don't write paragraphs. Right? Just all you do is cite, summarize, briefly analyze. And I will count that as an informal writing grade, but it is going to be included in your paper. So now let's talk about the actual paper. The actual paper is going to be due 3 weeks from now. Okay. So I'm taking a little, like I said, I'm taking a little longer than what I said I was going to in the syllabus. The last paper, the last paper in the class, I don't think I have to explain as much because it's more of a traditional type of paper. So, I can push the calendar back. Now you should see this paper 3 prompt again. So this is called, like I said, exploratory and also a dialectical essay. So I say here, in the process of completing this essay, you should first identify what your original perception was on the research question you had. If you write about gun control, for instance, you may say something to the effect that you believe the government should not interfere before you started doing your research. So let's take gun control, right? Your initial belief might be, okay, the government has no right to tell me what kind of guns I want to buy, right? That's what I believe before I start doing this topic. This is going to be the introduction of your paper. Right? You're going to catch the reader's attention, but you're also going to explain to the reader, okay, this is what my original thinking is on this topic. Here's what I hope to find out. Right here, maybe you might say something to the effect like, I'm just going to test my belief to make sure it holds up after reading all these contrary opinions. Okay, so the very first part of this paper, that's what you do. You don't say, I'm arguing this because blah blah blah. Right? That's what you do in the last paper. The last paper, you're going to make an argument. This paper, you're just out to test your beliefs. Right? So it's called a dialectic. So this idea called a dialectic comes from a German philosopher named Hegel. Right? Hegel. Karl Marx used this idea a lot too in his writings. But it's this sort of way that they say knowledge is actually constructed. Like, this is how knowledge comes to be. So in a dialectic, you have what's called first the thesis. And the thesis so thesis has 2 different meanings. So you know about thesis statements in an argument paper. But in a dialectic, the thesis pretty much means what you originally believe before you test your beliefs in any new way. So like I said about gun control just now, I'm walking into this paper saying, I don't think the government has any right to tell me what kind of guns I'm going to buy. Right? So that's your thesis. And in a nutshell, the introduction to this paper, you're starting your dialectic out by saying, here's what I believe before I do anything else. So, you could, in theory, right after your topic's approved, you could go ahead and write that first paragraph, right? Because before you even do any research, right? This is what I believe about this topic. Maybe you might say something to the effect like, maybe I'm not educated on the topic, right? Maybe it's just something I heard, or somebody told me something to believe this, or whatever. So be honest. Just explain what your belief is and why you believed it that way before you do any research. But In a dialectic, a thesis is challenged by what's called the antithesis. Okay, you could say antithesis too, but the proper pronunciation is antithesis. You know, but the antithesis is the opposite belief on your topic. So basically, the way this paper works, you're almost going to be talking aloud to yourself in the paper. So you start out saying, this is what I initially believe, but then you're going to kind of take an article by article approach, right? You'll briefly sort of introduce the article. You don't have to summarize it too much. Just give us enough that we need. But you're going to test your belief in this paper with the opposite belief over and over and over. But you can also test your belief with articles that reaffirm your original belief too, right? That's why I'm telling you to look up both. But in the paper, there needs to be at least a couple of articles that you talk about, you know, that showcases the opposite view. So in the paper, then, you're almost going to be talking aloud to yourself, like I said. You know, this is another paper where you write in the first person, just like the August Tannen paper was, in the narrative. This paper will be kind of weird if you don't talk in the first person, because this is about you. This paper is about your intellectual sort of process in getting from point A to point B.
So this paper is going to be kind of like a trial of your own like opinion on something? Exactly. Okay.
Exactly. Right. You're testing your beliefs, all these other beliefs. Right. Or educated beliefs about what you originally believed. You're gonna bring both in. And that's called the antithesis, like I said. Right? That's the process where you challenge your ideas. What eventually comes of this answers your question from a second ago. What eventually comes from this is the synthesis. So just the way that I always like the metaphor I always like to use to describe this. Imagine these are two bulls locking horns, right? The thesis and the antithesis. These are two. So in the paper, it's going to be massive, right? These two bulls are locking horns. Well, what eventually comes is the synthesis. So the synthesis is almost the thesis plus the antithesis. What new idea emerges, after you test all these beliefs, right? Do you still feel the same way? Well, if you still feel the same way, then at least now you still feel the same way, but at least now your ideas are affirmed by research, right? So even if your idea is still the same, that's still a synthesis, because now something new has been born in your mind, right? After doing all this research. You could also take the type of synthesis where maybe you start out saying, okay, I think the government has no right to tell me what to do with guns. Right? By the end of it, you might say something like, okay, I do think they have the right to tell us, right? Maybe gun violence in the country is terrible. People don't need assault weapons, right? So you could completely change your mind from point A to point B. That's something else that can happen. Oftentimes what happens too is maybe your beliefs are now a little more gray than they were before, right? So maybe you're a little in the middle in a way. So let's take the gun control example again. Okay, you start out saying, I don't think they have any right to tell me what to do, or tell anybody what to do. Then maybe you read an article saying, okay, people with mental instability can get guns easy. Right? You know, they say, oh shit, that probably shouldn't happen. Right? I think that people should have their guns, but I now think people should at least have should at least have a background check before they actually can purchase one. Right? That's still pretty much thinking the same way, but you're conceding something to the other side. Right? You're saying, okay, the other side does have a point about that. That's a synthesis that you can have too, right? You're not extreme anymore. You're not way over here or way over here or way over here, right? You know, you're maybe more in the middle. So that is your synthesis. And the synthesis of this paper is the conclusion. Right? The introduction and the conclusion in this paper are both essential, because by the time I get to the synthesis, you know, it should make sense what you now believe, right? So this paper you can't outline this paper. This isn't something that you can plot out before you write it. This is just something you just got to write and just let it come to you as you write it. Right? There's no, besides just the very loose structure I'm getting ready to give you, there's no, it's not like a normal paper where it's tightly organized, right? This paper is going to be very loosely structured. It's all about your opinions being tested. So this little outline I give you in this prompt, so like I said, you start out your introduction. What do you believe about the topic? What are your initial biases? What do you hope to gain from doing the process of research? So the introduction should answer all those questions. But then when you get to the paper, I'm having you do 8 sources for a bibliography. You probably don't have to do all 8 of them in this. Right? I'm asking you to do more research than you might need. But maybe at least 4 or 5 of the articles in your bib you will include here. So you're going to take a sort of source by source approach. So each one of these little sections of the paper, you'll start out by briefly summarizing it. You know, you don't want the whole paper to be summary. That's not the point. But in each section, give us just enough summary that we need to show what this article says.
So, just to make sure that I have this right in my head, we only need to give enough summary of it to explain why we think what we do now after reading it.
Yes.
Okay.
Just enough where I can kind of follow along with what this article is about. So it doesn't have to be meticulous, just a couple of sentences. So you start out each section introducing the article, and then that's where, after you introduce it, that's when you explain, okay, here's what this article did to my original belief. Here's how this article's testing my original belief. Yeah, maybe it's the same belief that you started with, right? Maybe it's something completely opposite. So that's what you do. I say here, you wrestle with ideas and roll in complexity, right? So you're kind of getting yourself in the mud wrestling with this other view. Right? You do this, you take this kind of loose structure, and you do this with all 4 or 5 of the sources that you include. Like I said, there needs to be some balance. You need to have an original view test, maybe some stuff about your original view, but also your opposite view. You might ask yourself, okay, what order should I go in with these articles? Should I start out with articles that talk about my original view? Should I start out immediately going to the other view? Well, there's no sure answer to that. It's however you want to do it. So if you want to start out just sort of scratching the itch on your original view, do it. If you want to start out challenging yourself immediately, do it. There's no right or wrong answer to how you approach that. But ideally, the further down you go in your paper, the more complicated it gets, right? So each one of these sections should build off of the other. So maybe your first source, let's take the gun control example again, right? Maybe your first source is about, there shouldn't be any, the government shouldn't be able to tell you that you can't buy an AK-47, right? Maybe your first source gives that perspective. Maybe by the time you get to source C, right, maybe you get that other view. Well, what I'm saying is you shouldn't forget about what your first source says the further down you go through the paper. So you can even kind of put these different people's ideas in conversation with each other too. So source C, when you're talking about source C, you can say, okay, well, after reading source A, this added something new to my perspective. So the further you go down, I'm pretty much just telling you, don't feel like each section's isolated. Put these sources in conversation with each other the further down you go. So their first source, you obviously can't do that. But the further down you go, you can kind of put all these different voices in conversation with each other. Right? And by the time you get to the end, that's your conclusion. That's your synthesis. So, but by the time that I read that conclusion paragraph, I should probably know what it is that you now think anyway, right? Because it should be organic, right? It should sort of come together. But regardless in the conclusion, that's where you now state your newfound educated belief. And you guys will see that this paper and the next paper kind of work in tandem, because whatever the conclusion is of this paper becomes your thesis statement in the next paper, which is more of a traditional argument paper. So both papers kind of build off. The next paper builds off of this one. So, like I said, you can't outline this. You really can't. It's just this is a paper that you write sort of organically. You could write this paper in chunks, right? And it would make sense. Like I said, you could even do the introduction to the paper today if you wanted to. But as you find articles, that's when everything will start coming together. And like I said, keep your summaries to a minimum here. because you are going to include your bibliography at the end. So this will be about 5 to 6 pages long, this paper. This paper is a little longer than the last two. But that's not even counting the bibliography. You're going to add the bibliography on too. So by the time you're done, you'll probably have 6, 7 pages that you're turning into. And pretty much all this stuff on this prompt is just explaining what I've already just explained about the dialectic. So here's the calendar then. Here's the timeline we're going to be on. So this Friday coming, I'm going to have you read some sample papers, some sample exploratory essays. And I'm going to have you do a discussion post on them. And I'm basically going to ask you to pick one of them, whichever one resonates with you the most. I think I've got one on should the Washington Redskins change their name. I have one on reality TV. I forget what the other example I have is. But I'm going to ask you to read through the paper and then identify the writer's dialectic. Right, so what was the writer's initial belief? What were the opposite beliefs that the writer brought in? Then what was the synthesis? What did the writer now think by the end? So I'm going to ask you to kind of trace, this paper's thinking. Right? You guys will see how this works after you actually read a few examples. But I'm going to ask you Friday to read them, and then in your post, identify the dialectic, what's happening in this article. So that's for this Friday. So by Friday you'll have some ideas there. Like I said, next week. So next week, it's kind of an easy week because I'm assuming that you're doing your research. I'm giving you time to breathe and do your research. Whatever you do, don't procrastinate on doing your research. Right? You're just going to stress yourself out. You're going to do a sloppy job of it if you do. So over the next week or so, do your research a little piece by piece. Across next week, put together your bibliography. But while you're doing your research next week, that's when you're going to practice how to cite sources correct. It's kind of hard to do a bibliography if you don't know how to cite a source. So that's what we're doing next week. You're practicing how to cite sources in both MLA and APA. It's important that you know how to do both for your other classes. For my class, you're going to use MLA. I hate APA for many reasons, but I never have to use it because I'm an English person. But it is important that you learn how to do it. So I'm going to have you do that scrambled citation sheet for both next week. And I will have instructions up for you on how to do that. I'll post the website that you need to go to. I'll give you the scrambled citations. Then I'll just say, take your best stab at it and put it in the right order. You guys will get a participation trophy grade just by doing it. So even if you're not completely right, maybe you're close, but even if you're not completely right, you at least took a stab at it. Okay, that's all I ask for next week. Just take a stab at it. And by the end of next week, I'll post the key so that you'll see how it's correctly done for your own entries. So again, do both of those before next Friday, because if you wait any longer than that, you're going to get a 0 on that assignment. because I have to post that key to make sure you're doing it right before you do the bibliography. And then for the next official class will be 2 weeks from now. But in the next official class, that'll be when you submit your bibliography to me. And then after you submit that bibliography to me 2 weeks from now, across the rest of that next week, that'll be the first week of November, I believe. Yeah, the first week in November, you'll submit the bibliography first, but then by the end of that week, I'm asking you to draft the exploratory essay for peer review. Okay, so peer review will be, I think, the Friday, the 6th of November. And I'll give you that weekend to do the peer review, and then by the, take a look at the calendar again. By the 9th of November, you'll turn this thing in. So we got a little bit of a timeline, right? It's a comfortable timeline. I'm giving you time to research and breathe and try to find good stuff. So make sure that you do a bang up job on it, right? Don't look up all your stuff the day before the bib is due, right? Take your time, do a little bit here, a little bit there. Your paper will be better for it. The way this thing is graded, I'm pretty much going to be grading you on, does the essay work, right? If I read your essay and it's completely biased in one way, right, your grade's going to be impacted. But by the time I get to that conclusion, a good exploratory essay, by the time I get to that conclusion, it makes sense, right? It's organic. It works. Right? So again, whatever you do, I'm completely unbiased. Right? So if you take a political topic, I don't care if if you start out conservative, you have to test the liberal view. If you start out in the topic liberal, you need to test the conservative view. Right? I'm gonna bend and twist your arm to make you look at the other side, regardless of politics. So I'm apolitical when it comes to grading. Okay, I'm gonna bend your arm and make you look at the other view, regardless of what it is. That's just an important thing in it, just to exist in this society that we're in. Right? People who are dogmatic and believe one way or the other and refuse to even look at the other view, to even consider it, right? That's part of what's wrong with this country, I think. Right? People need to be able to have a conversation and be able to agree to disagree sometimes, right? Everything shouldn't always be so heated and hostile. And that's what this class is supposed to do. It's supposed to teach you to think critically, to look at other perspectives that might not be comfortable to you, to get you out of your comfort zones. And that's the ideal here. All right. I don't know if all of you guys agree with that blanket statement. That's probably the most political thing I'll say all semester, right?
I agree with it almost completely. I think that we all really do need to be able to have a conversation and concede our sides sometimes, and just come to an in-between, except on things like human rights. That's the only thing that I really don't believe on compromising on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's some things that are hard to debate in that regard, right? Like different ways of equality and things like that, right? Those are things that's where you got to draw the line in the sand. I agree with you. Whatever it is, but whatever it is that you pick, make sure that it's not something like that, right? Where you're not going to change your mind regardless. Pick a topic that you're interested in, that you think that you have the potential to change your mind. That's what I'm asking you to do. Like I said, this thing will make a lot of sense after you read some examples this week. So that's what you're going to do later this week, read examples. All this will make more sense after you read some of them. Something to consider when you read the examples even is, did you buy the writer's synthesis, right? Did you think that the writer gave all the sides their just due? Does the writer seem stubborn about changing their side, right? That's a question you can ask when you read through these examples too. I think you'll see with the Washington Redskins essay I'm giving you in particular, I think that writer it's a good paper, but the writer's a little stubborn, I think. So I'll be interested to see what you guys think about that one in particular. So again, get started on your research. You know, if you haven't submitted that topic yet, do so. But once I approve that topic, get going with it. You can't start too early. So, what questions do you guys got before I move to the enhanced part of class? Anything about this essay that's confusing? Type it in the chat, or you can unmute your mic and ask me a question. So speak now or forever hold your peace, especially considering we're not meeting next week. All right, so I'll give a minute in case one of you type a message. All right, well, I'm not seeing anything pop up. Nobody's speaking up, so I'm going to assume that you guys are good. Yeah, it's kind of, normally I can look around the room and see confused faces, right? But it's not something I can do when I look at that darkness on my screen. So, I'll tell you guys what, do this really quick before we move on. Type anything in the chat box that's confusing. Type anything that I've said that's confusing. You know, you can write it as a question and just give me something. You know, because I don't want to assume that everything I said made sense. You know, so type, I don't care what it is, type, all of you give me something. Right? Give me something that's confusing. Okay, Hunter said nothing's confusing. Nothing yet. Rick says, what if you can't find enough info on the topic we turned in? I don't think that'll be a problem, Rick. I think you will probably find enough, right? I haven't looked at the topic you chose yet, but you shouldn't have any problem finding 8 articles on whatever it is you do. The only time you run into that problem is if it's such a brand new topic, you can't find stuff in the databases, right? So if it's something that just came up, you might not find enough. Right? But most of the time, you won't ever have that problem. So that was a good question, Rick. All right, so with that said, then those of you who are not in Enhanced can enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll spend a few minutes in Enhanced. So I'll give a minute to make sure everybody moves on.
I finally got my mic to work though.
That's good.
Would have helped out whenever I had those questions about work though. That's a lot of typing.
Yeah, well, that day that it was just me and you on here, and you were typing messages to me.
It was paragraphs, and I was like, I tried to sum it down more, so it wasn't just like.
I didn't mind. That was kind of fun.
Yeah, I've missed 4 classes with Dr. Bartlett though.
Yeah, I will text him and deliver the message you just sent me.
The email wouldn't go through. Like, I got on my student email and it said that for some reason it wasn't going to go through.
Yeah, we're pretty good friends. We text each other, so I'll send him a message.
Thank you.
All right, so let's talk about this next grammatical thing. All right, so but before I do that though, I just wanted to open the floor up. We've talked about comma splices and run-ons and all that in this class before, but some of you guys are struggling with it a little. I noticed when I read the narratives. I'm guessing some of you might have went through and fixed them in your revisions, right? But is there anything especially about those errors that I can answer? Because those are the most common ones. They're frequent. And if you have a question about them, if I wrote comma splice on your paper and you don't know what I meant or something like that, you need to let me know now. Okay, so anything like that I can address before I move on to the lesson I have planned. All right, so when I do mark those on the paper, I normally circle the commas if they're comma splices. If they're run-ons, I'll normally put like 2 little squiggly lines below it to show that you need some type of punctuation in between 2 sentences. All right, so if you had problems with that, definitely keep working on it. And go back and consult their lesson from before if you need to. And also, our other lesson, big grammar lesson, was on cut and clutter. Right, so get rid of those ing verbs, especially. Is watching, right? Just say watch, watched, or watches. Right, practice all those clutter cutting strategies we've done too. So this lesson today is about relative clauses. Okay, relative clauses. Let me pull this up. So whenever you have a relative clause in a sentence, usually a relative clause kind of functions as almost like an adjective in the sentence. It's a sentence within a sentence, right? So that's basically what a relative clause is, a sentence within a sentence. And all of you use these, even in your daily speech, and you just don't know it, what you're doing. It's just part of our language. But so just to take an example, the students who were most impressive graduated with honors. Well, as you see, this is a sentence within a sentence. You have a subject who, you have a verb were. But the sentence within the sentence, who were most impressive, this is an adjective that modifies students. Right, so that's what a relative clause is. We have many blessings for which we are grateful. For which we are grateful modifies blessings. So the big thing to know about relative clauses is you have to know which words are correct in which instances. And also when you use a comma and when you don't. That's another thing to take away from what I'm getting ready to talk about. So some of these relative clauses are restrictive. And if it's restrictive, that means you don't have to use a comma because it's part of the meaning of the sentence. So women who work are happier than women who don't work. Well, if you take away the relative clause, the sentence isn't going to make sense. You would say women are happier than women, right? The relative clause in this sentence is an essential ingredient to knowing to the meaning of the sentence. So if it's an essential sort of phrase, it shouldn't have a comma with it, right? It's part of the meaning of the sentence. So it gives you some more examples. Students learn a lot. Students who ask questions learn a lot. Well, you need to know what type of student it is who learns a lot. Teachers are unpopular. Teachers who give a lot of assignments are unpopular. So that defines exactly what type of teacher it is. And that's a restrictive relative clause. So you don't include commas with it. But you do include commas with them if it's not essential to the meaning of the sentence. So going to the movies, which I love to do, can be very expensive. Well, you can say going to the movies can be very expensive, and the sentence is still going to mean the same thing, right? So you put commas around it if it's something that you can omit from the sentence, then it will still make sense, right? So that's, in a nutshell, that's one of the main things to know here. If it can be omitted, The sentence is still going to mean the same thing. Put commas around it. If it can't be omitted because the sentence's meaning is going to completely change. If you do omit it, don't include commas. The other thing to do with this lesson is you need to know which, these are the words that go with relative clauses are called relative pronouns. You know, usually who, whom, and whose, those are used to describe people. That and which are used to, mostly is used not to describe anything that's not a person. So the thing to know here, this is where a lot of people make mistakes. You need to know the difference between when to use which and when to use that. When to use which and when to use that. Trying to look and see if this handout gives some good examples. So you use which, but the main thing to know here is you use which most of the time when it's a non-restrictive clause, when it's something that can be omitted from a sentence. So the Empire State Building, which used to be the tallest building in the world, is still a popular tourist attraction. Well, you can omit that whole phrase and the sentence will still make sense. And if you notice, you use a comma with which. So if you have a sentence, anytime you include a phrase that starts with which, you know, you should have a comma that goes right before it. You use that, you know, when it's something that can't be omitted. Notice what I just did there. Use that when it's something that can't be omitted. You just kind of see how our language has these phrases built in. So the lessons that we have learned are no more important than the lessons that we have yet to learn. Well, if you take those phrases out, so you say the lessons are no more important than the lessons. So that goes with restrictive clauses, which goes with non-restrictive clauses. So that's basically, in a nutshell, the difference between that and which. I notice most of the time when I notice an error in this regard, most of the time it's people using which when they should use that. Like that's the main error with relative clauses. People will use which when they should use that. I mean, it sounds good when you say it incorrectly. So you could say the lessons which we have learned are no more important than the lessons which we have yet to learn. Right? That sounds fine to our tongue, right? You know, that makes sense. But that's just the rule. If you're writing something, if it's something that you can omit, use which. If it's something that you can omit, use that. So even though it sounds fine to the ear, in writing, that's the convention. Okay. And then when you're talking about people, usually with people, you have the pronoun who, whom, and whose. So I know a woman who has 2 children. So in the relative clause for who is the subject of the relative clause, has is the verb, right? The whom is a word that's not used too much in our modern language. This is kind of an archaic thing that's still kind of stuck around sometimes. But you use whom when you have another subject in your phrase. So my friend has 2 children whom she loves very much. So note here that we have a comma with the whom. So the subject of the phrase is she, the verb is loves. Well, it's a relative clause that's tacked onto the sentence. So you use whom in this case because you have another subject. You could say my friend has 2 children who she loves very much. You know, that sounds fine to the ear, but in the written form, you should use whom in that case. So that's the main thing to know with relative clauses that deal with people. You use who when it introduces a restrictive clause. Use whom whenever it's a subject and verb after it. So that, and just to reiterate, that and which is used for a non-restrictive clause. That is used for a clause that's important to the meaning of the sentence. Whenever you're talking about people, who is usually with the restrictive clause. Whom is when there's a subject and verb after. So this error isn't the end of the world, right? Like I said, even to the spoken ear, it sounds fine if you say it the incorrect way, but it's just a conventional writing. You got to know when to use that instead of which. You got to know when to use whom instead of who. You know, that's in a nutshell the gist of this lesson. So questions about this? I'm probably going to give you guys another quiz soon. It's probably going to be a combination of relative clauses and cutting clutter. We did cutting clutter a week or so ago. It's going to be a mix of both. So yeah, I'll probably give you that quiz next week while everything else is relatively calm. So there'll be some questions about that and which. There'll be some questions about who and whom. So there'll at least be a question in there about both of those. So anything I can address, but that and which and who and whom makes sense. If it didn't, let me know. Give me the thumbs up if you're good. All right, so good deal then. So that is the gist for the enhanced part of the class for today. Like I said, for those of you in this enhanced part, I'll give you an extra quiz next week to take on cutting clutter with this. So with that said, that's all for today. I will let you guys go. Happy research. Happy hunting. If you struggle finding research, let me know. That's something that I can help you with. I have access to where I'm still faculty at WVU. I still have access to all their databases too. I can even help you find stuff on there if you need. That's something we can set up a Zoom and all that if you want, if you need any help with your research. So with that said, let's talk to you guys next time.
Have a good day.
You too.